Avatar, The Way of Water is the long-awaited sequel to 2009's highest-grossing film of all time. Directed and co-written by James Cameron and starring Sam Worthington and Zoe Saldana, it once again offers dazzling visual effects, great use of 3D technology, exciting action scenes, and that's about it. Over 10 years after the events of the first film, Sully has settled into a peaceful life on Pandora with his Na'vi family, consisting of his wife Neytiri and their 4 children. However, Jake's idyllic world is soon thrown into jeopardy after a previous threat returns to finish what was started more than a decade ago. With few other options left to explore, Jake decides to seek help from the nearby reef tribe whose very existence revolves around living as one with the aquatic life. As the danger becomes more apparent, Jake's forest-dwelling tribe and their marine counterparts must work together to set aside their personal differences before Pandora, as they know it, is lost forever. James Cameron's multi-million-dollar 2009 film Avatar is quite possibly one of the most enigmatic pieces of media ever released. How can a film that grossed over $2.8 billion at the global box office leave so little impression on pop culture? After more than 10 years since its initial release, there are still several people who cannot even remember a single line from the movie or name just 3 of its many characters. Nevertheless, the general consensus among all of those who saw it agree that the film was a visual treat and featured some jaw-dropping use of 3D. Whether or not the public wanted a sequel is a matter of debate, but 13 years, a Disney buyout, and a history-changing pandemic later, we finally have Avatar, The Way of Water, a follow-up that does pretty much exactly what the original did but looking much nicer while doing it. Like the original, the plot is basically Dances with Wolves, Pocahontas and Fern Gully set in outer space with blatant pro-environmental, anti-military messages constantly beating us over the head. Although I am fine with the idea of protecting the Earth, and are fully aware that the military is capable of some truly awful things, there are better ways of conveying this to us rather than through the shameless guilt-tripping that both the original and this sequel is going for it. Before its release, I was hoping this follow-up would at least try something different from its predecessor, since a common criticism was that it was ripping off all of the aforementioned movies. But to my disappointment, the writers seem to have taken these complaints in stride, because what we have here is a simply carbon copy of the original, only with flashier visual effects. With all of that said, the visuals are absolutely fantastic and clearly this film's saving grace. Right from the very beginning, James Cameron brings us back to the brightly colored world of Pandora we remember, with stunning environments that actually look like they've been lived in. The forests still brim with that beautiful iridescent light, and the CGI wildlife are all flawlessly integrated into this picturesque ecosystem. However, as the title would suggest, the main setting is in the water, which is where the film impresses the most. There's so much beauty to appreciate in the way the water realistically glistens in the sunlight, along with witnessing how all the aquatic creatures inhabit this living space. All of this was apparently done by combining groundbreaking CGI with the real on-set locations filmed off the coast of New Zealand. Practically every individual shot of this movie looks like it cost at least $1 million, and it certainly shows. This is definitely a movie that needs to be seen at the cinema in 3D, as I imagine watching it on a tiny screen like a phone wouldn't do it justice. In other words, seeing this film in 3D at the cinema is not an option, it is a requirement. Also, for a film that runs for over 3 hours, there isn't really all that much in it that could be considered boring, at least not by my standards. There's plenty of fast-paced action and dazzling visuals to keep the audience occupied, that you can forget about the movie's lengthy runtime for the most part. Even some scenes that are obviously intended as filler for the sake of eye candy, move at such a reasonable pace that I found them to be forgivable in the long run. It seems that James Cameron was aware that if he was going to make a movie that clocks in at over 3 hours, he should at least make each moment as entertaining as possible to prevent the audience from losing interest. Of course, none of that really matters if you have a weak bladder, so I don't recommend drinking too much water before embarking on a viewing. There's not really a whole lot worth mentioning about the characters since they were all generic and bland to begin with. Most of them haven't changed all that much since the first movie, which is surprising considering more than 10 years have passed since then. Sully is still the same as when we last saw him, only this time he has a wife and 4 children, and that's about it. Sam Worthington plays him to the best of his ability, which is a generic protagonist with a good heart. No matter how hard I tried, I just couldn't feel any emotional connection to the other characters, except for maybe some of the sea life, which resemble real-world animals like whales and dolphins. To quote Red Letter Media's Mr. Plinkett, the ultimate irony with Avatar is that for all the time and money spent to make this movie in 3D, the story and the characters were still stuck in one dimension. Taking into account the sheer scale of its world building and special effects, Avatar, The Way of Water is an astonishing achievement in visual filmmaking. Like its predecessor, it sets out to be an immersive experience for anyone seeking a brief method of escape from the real world, and on that note I believe it succeeds. Sure, it's easy to pick the film apart for its unoriginal story, forgettable characters, and belated release, but that won't change the fact that it still looks amazing with all of these faults in tow. According to James Cameron, there are 3 more sequels on the horizon, with each due out once every 2 years. My only hope is that these ones will feel different, because this franchise can only survive on eye candy for so long before audiences become desensitized. Call me old-fashioned, but I'll always prefer a great story over great visuals.